Chapter 9, Painting. Learning objectives. Distinguish among the early painting media: encaustic, fresco, and tempera. Describe what is distinctive about oil painting as a medium. Explain why watercolors, perhaps the most expressive of the painting media. Discuss some of the advantages offered to artists by synthetic painting media. Outline some of the ways that painting has combined itself with other media. Our first painting is a fresco painting by Giorgio Vasari. Vasari was a very good painter. He wasn't of the quality of, say, a Michelangelo, but Vasari is best known for his collections of stories and historical documents and information about the lives of the artists during the Renaissance period. Michelangelo, Ghiberti, Raphael, Leonardo, Lippi, Donatello are some of the artists that he gave us valuable insight during that time period. Vasari also painted the interior dome for the cathedral in Florence, the one that Brunelleschi developed and designed. During this time, Giorgio Vasari passed away, and it was finished by Federico Zuccaro. Very interesting dome painting. And this is the Florence Cathedral in Florence, Italy. Painting was becoming an art form in its own right. With this self-portrait of the allegory of painting, or also called La Pittura, it is this idea that the artist is almost a genius in their ability to convey visual messages. Artemisia Gentileschi was a brilliant painter and one of the most famous female painters in that time period. Early painting media. Artists use pigment suspended in a medium or binder that anchors the pigment to the support or the painting surface. Most supports are too absorbent to allow easy application, so they are primed with a paint-like ground. We call that gesso today. A solvent or vehicle is a thinner that allows paint to flow more readily, so this could be like turpentine or mineral spirits for oil paint, or for modern acrylic painting, it is water-based, so you can wash your brushes. One of the advantages of oil paint is that it is thinned with linseed oil, and it takes much longer to dry, and that gives the artist more time to blend the color. One of the oldest painting medias is encaustic. Encaustic is a wax-based paint, and so you can imagine how difficult it would be for an artist to dip their brush in heated wax and paint that onto a surface. We have an example of surviving encaustic painting from Egypt, and this is mummy portrait of a man. And look how luminous the wax is and how lifelike the features of the man painted. Encaustic requires the painter to work quickly while the wax is still liquid. Luminosity afforded by the medium has led to a recent revival as seen in Jasper Johns' flag. Early frescoes were discovered well in Pompeii and Herculaneum. Still life with eggs and thrushes features objects painted to life size. Fresco was the preferred medium for wall painting. And in a fresco, pigment is mixed with lime water and applied to a lime plaster wall. The two names of these frescoes are Bonfresco, which is a wet fresco, or Fresco Secco, which is a dry fresco. The Bonfresco, where the paint is mixed with lime water, it is absorbed into the wet plaster. So it's going to last a much longer time period, whereas the Fresco Secco sits on the surface of the dried plaster, and that allows for moisture or mold to get underneath of the plaster, underneath of the painting. This is a fresco from Pompeii, and we see the artist has designed a fresco based on a still life with eggs and pitchers. Notice how that plate is coming off of the table. It's coming out into our space. Also, we get a pretty accurate rendering of perspective there from the table. We see one really good orthogonal line. The linear perspective is kind of cut off, so we can't really see how accurate the 1-point perspective would be at this time period. So it's most likely more of an intuitive linear perspective in the fresco. Artists must work quickly with the bond fresco before the plaster dries. But with fresco secco, the artist's pace can be as slow or quick as desired. However, a disadvantage of the fresco secco is that moisture can creep between the plaster and the paint. They survive best in arid climates. The Bodhisattva from India was created with layers of mud and straw, as well as gypsum or lime plaster. The figure is lavishly adorned with jewelry and forms a teaching mudra in his right hand. Italian Renaissance and later frescoes emphasized creating the illusion of reality. So this is a very unique cave painting where they're incorporating the mud and straw and the fresco gypsum plaster into making a very durable cave painting. The Scrovegni Chapel was designed to house 38 individual scenes of the lives of the Virgin and Christ. In Lamentation, lines between different sections of the fresco are apparent, especially in the sky. Giornata, or a day's work, is what we call sections of frescoes that are able to be completed in one day. This is a fresco by Giotto, the Lamentation scene. And if you look really closely around the angels up in the sky, you can see an outline or a line. And as Giotto was working on this fresco, he would paint a day's plaster for each one of those angels. When he was finished with his day's work, he would take a chisel and hammer and chip away the plaster. And the next day, he would add another layer of plaster side by side with it. Over time, it has revealed the lines around each day's work. Giotto was one of the most important early Renaissance painters. The Renaissance is coming out of the Middle Ages, where everything is pretty much frontal or in profile. The Giotto here has incorporated 3/4 view and profile. Notice how that wall that is coming down and it's acting as an orthogonal line that is bringing emphasis and focal point to the head of Christ. Also, Giotto has turned the figures in the very foreground, their backs to us, which would be unheard of in earlier styles of painting. Renaissance sought to make paintings more humanistic and more true to life and nature. A Baroque illusion ceiling is seen in the glorification of Saint Ignatius by Fra Andrea Pazzo. From the point of view of the congregation, it is though the roof or the church has been removed, it reveals the glory of the heavens. In the nave of the church, Pazzo has painted a fresco in the ceiling. And what he has done, according to the Baroque style is very decorative and loves detail. All of the different, the pilasters and columns. What he has done is he has extended the architecture of the roof, of the structure, and created the illusion that there is an added story in the architecture in the ceiling. He has painted the architecture, and it's very difficult to see where the real architecture ends and the illusion of his painting begins. When we look at a close-up here, we see that the Baroque period, they were really interested in this conversion of a person dying and moving into their afterlife. We see Saint Ignatius is being welcomed into heaven by Christ himself. Imagine walking into a cathedral church and looking up and seeing all this beautiful painting and the illusion of the foreshortening of these figures. It is like you're seeing through the roof right up into heaven. Tempera paint is made by combining water, pigment, and gummy materials such as egg yolk. In Renaissance time, working with tempera meant colors could not be blended readily, and chiaroscuro was accomplished through the means of hatching. Gesso made from glue and plaster or chalk prepares a surface for tempera paint. Giotto's Madonna and Child enthroned exhibits to advance the realism. The painting denotes a Madonna and Child, but connotes the greater love of God for humanity. The Madonna and Child sitting there with patron angels kneeling before her. We see a realistic figure that really feels like she is sitting in a chair. This was a great accomplishment for Giotto and the early Renaissance period. While the painter is denoting that we see the Madonna and the Christ child, what it is, the connotation is that this love for a mother and her child is comparable to the love of God for humanity. The didacticism or ability of a work to teach or elevate the mind was important to audiences in Giotto's time. Sandro Botticelli's Primavera is one of the greatest tempera paintings ever achieved. Much is known about the process utilized to layer paints and washes due to its restoration in 1978. This is La Primavera. It is known as the allegory of spring. So in the springtime, flowers bloom, and it's a time when love is in the air. The representation here with Venus and Cupid above her head, and Cupid is going to shoot its arrow at one of the three graces. Now this painting is meant to be read from the right to the left. That blue figure is hovering is Zephyrus. He is the god of the wind. He has captured Chloris. She is a springtime deity. She is kind of yellow and green. That's where the word chlorophyll comes from. It's a reference to that springtime green. He takes her and they get married. She is transformed into the figure right before her. And that is Flora. She is decorated with flowers, and she has a handful of flower petals, and she's throwing those out on the ground. The three graces are dancing, and they represent chastity, joy, shiny. They have different attributes. And Botticelli is kind of showing his skill as a painter, especially with tempera, by painting this kind of see-through fabric. They're doing a traditional dance. The middle of the three graces is looking over to the figure to the left, and that further brings our eye across the painting. This is Mercury. Mercury was the god of the travelers and medicine. The Romans took the Greek pantheon of deities and they renamed them. So Mercury is representing Hermes from the Greek tradition. Hermes had the caduceus staff. It is the symbol of medicine that we see today. Mercury is reaching up, clearing away the clouds. So there are no clouds that are allowed in this painting. Venus in the center, and notice how Botticelli has created this altarpiece-like feeling with the arch. In this arch that is created by this garden with the fruit of the trees above her. This is perhaps inspired by the garden of Hesperides. This garden of Hesperides or Hesperides is from the stories of Hercules. It was the 11th labor that he had to perform. The Hesperides garden was a garden of Hera, Zeus's wife, and she was given a tree with golden apples by the goddess Gaia. In this labor, Hercules goes to the garden. He finds Atlas, who is holding up the world. Now, Atlas was very strong, so Hercules wanted Atlas to do battle with this serpent, this giant serpent called Lacone, in order to take the apples. Hercules talks to Atlas, and Atlas says, I can't go to the garden for you because I'm holding up the earth right now. Hercules decides that he will hold up the earth for Atlas as long as when Atlas comes back, that he will give Hercules the golden apples that create immortality if one eats one of these golden apples. Atlas comes back and decides, hey, I'm tired of holding up the earth, so I'm not going to give you these apples. And Hercules tells him that, well, I'm getting pretty tired and I need to kind of wipe the sweat off my brow. When he did that, Atlas takes the earth for him, only temporarily, and Hercules tricks him. He takes those apples and takes off with them. And that's one of the labors of Hercules. Hera didn't like Hercules because Zeus fathered children with other women. Hercules wasn't a child of Hera. She was jealous of these affairs that Zeus would have. Preparing to paint the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's Libyan Sibyl. Pope Julius II had originally envisioned a commission for the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel to include geometric ornaments and apostles. The new design, containing 12 Old Testament prophets alternating with 12 sibyls, was laid in cartoon trace with a stylus prior to being painted. This is a drawing of the Libyan Sibyl. The Libyan Sibyls were kind of like, they were prophets of their same category, but they weren't Christian. They leaned more towards pagan prophets. Michelangelo has included the Libyan Sibyl on the Sistine Chapel. What he does, he converts this Sibyl into the Christian stories. What she is doing here is she is putting away her book of prophecy, of this pagan prophecy, and we see that she is twisting. She's twisting with a spiraling contrapposto. Look at the emphasis on that toe. She is stepping down from her soapbox, from her pedestal. She's stepping down. She's putting her book away. She is converting to Christianity in this painting. Preparing to paint the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's Libyan Sibyl. A surviving study shows the figure of a woman twisting in an almost spiral contrapposto. The severity of line and detail in the original sketch has been reduced in the final painting. This is Julie Green's Don't Name Fish After Friends. In this painting, a cat has jumped into the fish pond while the owners are away. The fish was named after some of their friends. They were mourning the loss of their fish when they returned and found that the cat had left a perfect little skeleton of the fish behind. We see many different layers in this painting. Julia Green has painted a scene of a Jewish man and then came back to it and painted armadillos. So this is a painting that has many different paintings in the layers of paint. We can look into it and see a depth and see different images coming forward, coming out of the layers of paint underneath. And this is a tempera on panel. Painters in Europe realized that oil paint was a more versatile medium than tempera. It can be blended on the painting surface, thinned with turpentine, taken straight from the tube for impasto, and is slower to dry. Glazing the painting causes paint to reflect light. This is a diagram that shows the many different layers. On the left, we see the wood that is the panel that the painting is going to be painted on. Then there's a cloth, then the white plaster ground, and then the many different layers of paint. On the right-hand side, we see the layers of tempera, underpainted, glaze number 1, blue oil, glaze number 2, blue oil, glaze number 3, blue oil, and then oil varnish. Like a diamond that is refracting light and reflecting light, we see the many different layers add to the luminosity of the oil paint. During this time period, during the Renaissance, in the above Italy, in the Northern Renaissance period, is where the oil painting first developed. It's like painting really took off during that time period. It really started developing, creating really brilliant paintings at the time. Better pigments, better surface quality of the paint, and very durable as well. We'll look at some examples. Robert Campin and his workshop created the Merode altarpiece in oil to very realistic effects. It is portable at only 2 feet in square. Details of the Annunciation scene include rays of sunlight that enter the room to fall directly on Mary's abdomen. A miniature Christ carrying the cross reveals that his entire life enters her body at the moment of conception. In this very small altarpiece, we see the patrons off to the left. They are not in the room, and a very creative way of incorporating them into the painting. They're in the altarpiece, but they're not in the central square. Gabriel and Mary are. We see pretty good linear perspective. Notice how the table is kind of tilted forward. It looks to me like the vases and candle, the symbols on that table, would slide right off into Mary's lap. She is reading a book, and Joseph to the left is a carpenter, and he is building mousetraps that are for sale outside his window. And in a close-up here, Christ is carried along the rays of light, entering into the Holy Mother. John de Heem's Still Life with Lobster depicts the wealth of the Dutch with a vanitas warning. So we've talked about the vanitas, that is a warning to take care of the important things in your life. These paintings remind us of the frivolous vanity of human existence. Material goods do not last as long as spiritual gifts. A beautiful painting, very realistic. And we see the symbols of the lobster that won't last long, that goes bad very quickly. The cup is turned over. Things in life don't always go the way you want. So sometimes life offers you a sour lemon. We see the lemon there. And there are timepieces that tell us that time is short. Oftentimes the grapes would represent the fruit of the vine as Christ. Now we're going to see contemporary vanitas by Antonio Lopez. The contrast between the light in the room compared with the abstract blotches of items within the refrigerator still reflects the vanitas theme. Even though food goes bad without refrigeration, even in this refrigerator, we see that food goes bad. There is a patchy area around the refrigerator, a lot of white in there, but the patched area that is probably an area where plaster needed repair is symbolic of this light, this heavenly light. Josephine Halverson's Carcass shows the expressive potential of the oil medium. The artist paints overlooked objects in a single day-long sitting on site to draw attention to what brought her to the object in the first place. This particular painting was created for a carcass from a slaughterhouse. She is out strolling around looking for inspiration for something that she can paint. And she takes notice of a slaughterhouse and thinks that, oh, there might be something going on in there that I might find interesting to paint. So as she's taking this tour through the slaughterhouse, a worker takes a side of beef and slams it down on the table, and blood squirts out onto her. She thinks, well, this is a very moving, visceral experience looking at this butchered animal. She does a sort of a vanitas of a carcass there. And this is oil paint on linen. Rackstraw Downs travel widely in search for interesting material. Presidio was painted on the Mexican-US border in plein air, so outside, referring to a work made on site outdoors. ATV tracks swirl through the hills in representation of man's impact on nature. His paintings distort to a bird's eye 100-degree view. Rackstraw Downs paintings are about our effect on the environment. What is man's relationship? What's our effect of, say, these ATV tracks on land? So we see lots of tracks, really a landscape that is without beautiful trees and water. It's kind of arid and dried up. He's getting us to question our footprint, our impact on the planet. Watercolor and gouache. Watercolor paintings are made by applying pigments suspended in water, the gum arabic, to dampen paper. Depending on paper absorbency, watercolor spreads along the fibers of the paper when it is applied. So we're going to look at Winslow Homer's painting here. When we first look at this painting, it's very beautiful, very exciting watercolor, beautiful flowers, poinsettias, and trees, a beautiful sky. And it's very inviting at first until you look at the wall and you see those black sharp shapes there. And we realize that those are broken shards of glass. They're designed to keep people out, keep people from climbing over the wall. With that, we realize that this is a gated community or a gated yard. This is painting that is about wealthy immigrants coming in and buying up properties and keeping the indigenous people out, as the ship represents the loss of these people's freedom and a loss of their land. It's like the ship is taking sail and sailing away. The watercolor is very beautiful, translucent layers of paint and even bits of the paper, of the white paper, showing through. Watercolor is very difficult to work with because you can't erase it, and you want that very fresh feeling of the water as being a vehicle carrying the pigment. You want it to be very simple and fresh looking. Watercolors aren't normally very labored because you don't want to build up the paint like you would in an oil painting or acrylic painting. So they generally are very expressive and very spontaneous. And that is why watercolor is known as being perhaps the most expressive of the painting forms. They're also very difficult to do. Winslow Homer does a great job in this painting, The Wall. We're going to look at John Marin's The Blue Sea. Rather than a visual recording of the main coastline, it features basic forms of landscapes swept by washes of watercolor in an effort to capture moving of me. So he wasn't really interested in capturing what the coastline really looked like. He was more interested in what is it that is moving when I look at this sunset of this coastline. What is it that moves me so when I see this? And that is what he tried to capture. What moves me in this painting? Gouache is opaque rather than transparent. Essentially, it contains watercolor mixed with Chinese chalk. It is well qualified to create large, flat colored forms, but not to blend brushstrokes and color together. The painting from Jacob Lawrence's Harlem series appears in drunken, disoriented imbalance created by flattened space. John Singer Sargent's Rushing Brook combines watercolor and gouache for textured effects. If you notice in Jacob Lawrence's painting with the gouache, we see very flat color, primary and secondary colors here. It is adding to the disabling effects of alcohol. We see tipped planes and people taking shots. One guy looks like he's passed out on the table. The shot by his hand has spilled over the radio, most likely playing jazz. This was a party. And it's titled, "You Can Buy Bootleg Whiskey for 25 cents a quart." And this is from his Harlem series. A great example of the effects of gouache, where you can get great flat color. This is John Singer Sargent's Rushing Brook, and Sargent has combined the flat effects of gouache with the transparent effects of watercolor. The beautiful rushing brook, the trees around it, we get a sense of the sunlight. Watercolor allows the whiteness of the paper to come through. We see some chalky areas that are more opaque, and that is the gouache over the watercolor. Synthetic media. Oil paintings outdoors prove frustrating due to its slow drying properties compared with continual exposure to elements. In Las Tres Grandes, a group of Mexican painters experimented with synthetic media. Water-based acrylic paints were produced beginning in 1956. Helen Frankenthaler was the artist that experimented with these new types of paint. Magna was the name of the paint. It was a product name. It was a type of acrylic paint where pigment was added to this acrylic resin. It didn't thin with water like acrylic paint does today, so you still needed to thin the paint with a solvent. This painting we're going to look at is called The Bay, and it has an atmospheric presence to it, and it looks very spontaneous. Helen Frankenthaler liked to work on the floor. She also worked with unprimed canvases. She didn't apply gesso to the surface. She didn't prime her canvas. The paint would be soaked into the canvas. It would kind of soak it up. And that lends itself to this kind of amorphous looking shade. And she created that by pouring paint right onto the canvas, working on the floor like Jackson Pollock. After pouring paint onto her canvas, she would have big sponges and she could move that paint around. And in this time period, artists were really interested in the material. They believed that there was an honesty and a truth to just working with the properties and the expressive qualities of the paint. So they, in their minds, they were representing a form of truth in the material. Acrylic surfaces were durable and well suited for outdoor and indoor spaces. Jeremy Deller's A Good Day for Cyclists mural features a hen harrier sinking its talons into a Range Rover. The work symbolizes an incident of two hen harriers being shot out of the sky by Prince Harry and his friend in 2007. This is a good example of hierarchical scaling. Notice how big that hen harrier is compared to the rover, to the machine, the vehicle. It diminishes the scale, showing that the importance of nature and this endangered bird is much more important to our lives and the environment than this Range Rover. This is about a story of Prince Harry, who has illegally shot a bird that is endangered. Acrylic paint in aerosol cans is the foundation of graffiti writing. While still considered a criminal activity by many, graffiti has entered the mainstream art world. Ken Sharf's part of the mural on Houston Street in Soho was painted with a predetermined plan over the course of 5 days. This painting, graffiti, was later painted over, but we see a beautiful expressive graffiti of these different faces, and some of them have big goofy smiles on their face, some are scared, some look like they're very jittery, and so it is an example of graffiti art and how graffiti artists have embraced the spray can as their media of choice. Mixed media. When artists purposely combine various media, their work is classified as mixed media. Its primary purpose is that it violates the integrity of painting as a medium by introducing everyday materials to the painting. Collage involves pasting or gluing fragments of printed matter or flat material onto a two-dimensional surface. We're going to look at Juan Gris, The Table. This is a synthetic cubist painting. We'll look at George Braque and Pablo Picasso, who worked in the synthetic style of cubism also. This is all about trying to differentiate what is real and what is fake. So the artist is asking those questions by combining real fragments of wallpaper, sometimes pages from newspaper, and the newspaper clipping is actually saying the same thing. What is real and what is fake? We see the book is coming off of the table and it's creating the illusion that this is a real book that's coming off of, right? The circle of the oval around it emphasizes that. The book leans right on the edge, that line of the oval, but it's coming off of the table. And the key to the drawer there, it is very realistic looking too. So we see rubbings of texture, frottage. We see clippings of newspapers. Sometimes they even added chair caning and different, whatever kind of material to this synthetic cubism. And it is designed to make you contemplate in this painting and in reality itself what is real and what is fake. When collage consists entirely of photographs, it is called a photo montage. Martha Rosler combined news, photographs of the Iraq War, and advertisements from magazines for gladiators. So in this, we see that it's like war is coming home. There's that old saying, when chickens come home to roost. These gladiators are coming out of the Iraq War and entering into our homes. Here we see people being arrested and handcuffed. And this is an example of a photo montage. Political collage. Hannah Höch utilized photo montage as a means of protesting the nationalism of Nazi art. These are examples of Dada, and Dada was rebelling against the horrors of World War I. And they did this by creating nonsense. They created art that was about nonsense. It was a way of kind of derailing the cruelties and the absurdities of the killings of World War I. In the image, identifiable figures are engaged in activities discussing Dadaism. So this was the sketch of Hannah Höch, and this is the final piece. And we can see that is Albert Einstein up there to the left. Known for her incisively political collage, and photo montage works, Dada artist Hannah Höch appropriated and rearranged images and texts from the mass media to create the failings of the Weimar German government. Höch drew inspiration from the collage work of Pablo Picasso and fellow Dada exponent Kurt Schwitters. Her own compositions share with those artists a similarity to dynamic and layered style. Höch preferred metaphoric imagery to the more direct, text-based, confrontational approach of her contemporaries. She rejected the German government, but often focused her criticism more narrowly on gender issues and is recognized as a pioneering feminist artist. Hannah Höch continued to work in this Dadaist style most of her life. She continued through the end of World War I and through World War II, all the way into the 60s. She worked in this style of Dada. Kara Walker's installations seem unsculptural due to her use of silhouette. What transforms her installation into a sculptural work are light and projections from the ceiling that activate the scene, as well as insert the viewer's own shadows. So when you walk into this and you create shadows on the wall, you're actually a participant in what's going on here. Kara Walker uses the silhouette, black silhouettes, because silhouettes don't have a dimension to them. They're cartoon cutouts that don't show the reality of three-dimensional form. And so we see narratives of slaves and masters that are interacting with each other. These lights are changing all the time. So you have the stability of these silhouettes, these black silhouettes on the wall, and projections of scenes that are taking place. And you walk in there and you cast your own shadow in amongst these black silhouettes. Here we see the capture called Insurrection. He's going to get hit in the head with that frying pan. Robert Rauschenberg's Monogram is a combined painting or high relief collage. The work brings together various objects, allowing them to coexist without unity. Rauschenberg found the goat in a secondhand store and struggled with finding a way to make it look as though it belonged in the painting. So yes, this is a very strange painting by Robert Rauschenberg. And he liked to go out and he would walk around the block and look for thrown away materials. They call those found objects, and it's a way of recycling. So he would play this game of walking around, and he would use the materials. It's free, and at the time he was a struggling artist. So these are some of the things that he came up with. So we see this goat is penetrating, going through this tire here as a raised or high dimension in this work of art. Representation is not the sole goal of painting, despite being an important one. Fred Tomaselli combines painting with mixed media to form his representations. So in this called an airborne event, this artist has combined mixed media, acrylic and resin on wood. We have this figure that looks like he's almost floating above these images of very colorful lights. Are these fireworks exploding in the air, or what are they? All these different images in the surface quality of the body and relating the mind is exploding in these like fireworks. This is titled An Airborne Event. It portrays what appears to be an image of a psychedelic high, but with a price. The jewel-like nature of pills can also be considered. Additionally, an airborne event can include the spread of disease or disaster. This artwork is kind of creating a question here about what is going on in this work of art. As a viewer, we can project meaning into a work of art. We become part of the narrative as we study a work of art, and we decide what its meaning is. So that's what it means when you bring content to a work of art. You become part of work of art. You project your experiences and your consciousness onto that work of art, and you decide what the meaning is in a work. Thinking back, distinguish among the early painting media, encaustic, fresco, and tempera. Describe what is distinctive about oil painting as a medium. Explain why watercolor is perhaps the most expressive of the painting media. Discuss some of the advantages offered by the artist with synthetic painting media. Outline some of the ways that painting has combined itself with other media. All right, let's call it a day.